To anyone who's having a difficult time, know that you don't have to be alone in going through it. You've taken a first step in being vulnerable, and that takes strength. Despite the overwhelming stress and uncertainties in today's modern yet chaotic world, I want to remind you that there are still a lot of people who remain kind and who want you to be kind to yourself. There is help, there is hope at 𝗕𝗁𝗵𝗁𝗕.
Magandang araw. I'm Senator 𝗕𝗁𝗵𝗵𝗁𝗍, the author and principal sponsor of the Mental Health Act. I'm so grateful that the mental health law was passed in time for this historic pandemic. We have so much adjusting to do, but it gave us an important foundation tungo sa isang healthy buhay at hanap buhay.
Hi, I'm Nicole. I'm 24 and I'm currently a medical student at the University of Santo Tomas. I'm also the Regional Finance Officer for APMC and CRSL.
Hello, my name is Dominique Calilong and I go by Nika or Dom, and I'm an ambassador/volunteer for #MentalHealthPH. I'm an alumna of UERM and I'm currently in my residency training towards becoming a psychiatrist.
So mental health refers to an individual's mental state of well-being, and just like physical health, it's also affected by numerous other factors such as biological factors or our genetic makeup, the hormones in our body, also cognitive factors, so the way that we think, and also societal or environmental factors such as our workplace, the situation at home, in school. And I think this last factor in particular plays a really big role in people's mental health nowadays, especially during the pandemic. So a lot of us, our environment has changed drastically. A lot of us are working from home now, or we're studying from home, and it's very different from how our life was before the pandemic. So at home, we probably have more responsibilities for our family, or I guess some of us also, in contrast, we live alone and away from our family, away from our friends. This also could affect our mental health, and even getting COVID could also affect your mental health, like having to isolate from everyone, feeling lonely. And even if our situation hasn't drastically changed, the pandemic per se could affect us indirectly. It could give us anxiety and make us feel like we always have to be on our toes to watch out for the virus, make sure everyone in our family is safe. So I think all of these contribute greatly to the state of our mental health during the pandemic.
Mental health is about the quality of our lives, after all. Without mental health, there can be no health. And without health, we are not free to pursue our basic needs, to spend time with our loved ones, and to make our dreams come true. The MH Act is historical because for the first time, we created legislation that articulated and institutionalized mental health as a fundamental part of our basic rights. Malaking panalo iyan para sa kalusugan ng mamamayang Pilipino.
As a healthcare worker, my mental health is tested on a daily basis. It's challenging and quite distressing, having to isolate yourself from your family and your loved ones in order to help other people. While I understand that is our duty as doctors, at the same time, it can get a bit complicated because some of the patients in hospitals we work with, severely inflicted by COVID, they happen to be the same people who are constantly violating healthcare protocols, and that doesn't exclude people in the higher ups, including government officials and leaders. And And we're also having to constantly convince people that COVID is real.
As a medical student, it was really anxiety-inducing to have to take online exams or to attend online lectures, knowing that the internet connection in our country is really bad. And as a daughter, I guess also as a member of my family, I'd also get anxiety over making sure that my family is always safe and they're always following protocols.
On behalf of my fellow healthcare workers, I do want to say that the pandemic has affected our mental health in unprecedented ways, from physiological fatigue, burnout, even stretching to moral injury.
A lot of things have happened over the past year in terms of the pandemic, and I personally realized that self-care or coping mechanisms aren't always like the stereotypically pretty self-care nights that you take a picture of and post on Instagram. Taking care of yourself is also difficult. So my coping mechanisms personally, it would range from simple stuff such as taking a yoga class or trying to meditate, or planting, or even buying a lot of stuff on Shopee. But also self-care, I realize, is also on the opposite spectrum. It can also be difficult. Sometimes it's learning to say no to commitments, or also not buying stuff on Shopee because you know that you'd have to save, or forcing yourself to eat healthy because this is what your body needs during the pandemic, or even forcing yourself to work out also because this is what your body needs to stay healthy and alive during the pandemic. And sometimes self-care also means acknowledging your emotions or just crying it out sometimes. So self-care, I learned, isn't always going to be pretty, but this is what your body needs, and this is how you take care of yourself.
One of the harsher challenges that I should have sought help for, in retrospect, was probably a few years ago. There was a lot of conflict within my family at the time, and I found it difficult to acknowledge that something like that was happening, and it was hard for me to verbally express it. I'm generally a talkative person, so when I'm not as out there, or when the silence starts creeping in, that's my warning that I could be struggling. Because I couldn't immediately ask for help, I found myself coping in other ways, through healthy and unhealthy methods. For example, I started to live in isolation. I was keeping distant from the people who were close to me. I was draining myself at work day in, day out, because it was the only thing that distracted me from this perpetuating state of anxiety, and everything else seemed like a chore. Even just saying hello to people. So I wonder if anybody listening to this ever found themselves in a similar situation where, menial tasks become very difficult to carry out, and productivity becomes, like, your everyday productivity suddenly becomes an achievement. So months passed, and I eventually came to my senses, thankfully. I realized that I had to be kind to myself, and I had to get myself out of my head. So things kind of just followed suit. Those coping mechanisms eventually switched to healthier ones, which were just actually hobbies that I used to love and do, like running, playing the piano, writing poetry. Another coping mechanism I found to be effective was volunteering. So initially I was involved with this animal rescue organization, and when I decided to involve myself further in another organization, it led me to #MentalHealthPH.
So over the past few years, I've noticed how people are slowly becoming more aware of the importance of mental health, and people are slowly becoming more comfortable talking about mental health and mental health conditions. So these are really great. However, we still have so much to do for the mental health advocacy. At the most basic level, I think it's important that individuals learn to acknowledge their feelings, their emotions, and learn basic self-care. And also, we should continue the mental health education. Most of the time when we talk about mental health conditions, we think about anxiety or depression, and there's nothing wrong with that, because these are one of the more common conditions here, especially in our country. However, there's still a lot more conditions that need to be brought to light. So for example, schizophrenia, OCD, eating disorders, even substance abuse. These are really important conditions that should be talked about out there and open, and people should be educated more about these.
I think the best way to reduce stigma around mental health is to reassure somebody, whether that's a family member, a friend, a patient, or any Filipino, that it's okay to not be okay. And I'm sure everybody must have heard that, because it's literally a title of a song. And maybe that is so because that message deserves to be repeated as much. Every person has a story to tell, and it's only human that we respect and show compassion towards their perceptions of what is happening around them. When you reach out in that way, as if, to gently tell them that, okay, listen, nobody expects you to be at your best all the time. Happiness is just a single part of this spectrum. And positivity is not synonymous to well-being. And overall well-being is sometimes determined by certain factors that are simply beyond our control. You're brave enough to acknowledge these feelings, these difficulties. You're brave enough to be honest with yourself. And I think that's the most important thing. I think when you say something as genuine as that, it's a short message. It's a minute of empathy. I think, when given at that critical moment, it can mean the difference to somebody who's at the brink of deciding whether to help themselves or to hurt themselves.
Please hang in there. Please keep fighting. It gets better. I just want to share that I myself have also been diagnosed with anxiety and depression a few years back, and it was really tough for me. What really helped me was learning to seek help and therapy, also having a solid support system. And actually now, during the pandemic, there are lots of opportunities to seek help online. So a lot of psychologists and psychiatrists, counselors, and even peer support groups have their services online, which are more accessible for some people. Some people have busier schedules and they can't really go to a clinic, and these online support services, online counseling services are actually more accessible to people who can't really go to a physical clinic.
To anyone who's having a difficult time, know that you don't have to be alone in going through it. You've taken a first step in being vulnerable, and that takes strength. Despite the overwhelming stress and uncertainties in today's modern yet chaotic world, I want to remind you that there are still a lot of people who remain kind and who want you to be kind to yourself. There is help, there is hope at 𝗕𝗁𝗕𝗁. We strongly advocate for mental health to be recognized as a fundamental human right. Our organization aims to promote and protect the mental health of Filipinos through increased forms of support and accessibility of resources through an online digital platform. #MentalHealthPH stands by a holistic approach, such that in achieving a mentally healthy community, change must happen in 3 levels: the level of self, society, and system.
Lastly, I want to say that it's really possible for us to help destigmatize mental health conditions on a national or even global scale. So at first, it may sound really intimidating, but there are numerous opportunities out there, even for small medical students such as myself, to contribute to the discourse on a bigger and more concrete scale. For example, there are lots of conventions held online nowadays, which connect young people like us, from different parts of the country or even different parts of the world to talk about mental health.
According to the initial results of the 2020 National Survey of the Department of Health, at least 3.6 million Filipinos are suffering from mental health issues during the COVID-19 pandemic. Due to increased stressors during the pandemic, the suicide rate increased by 57% in 2020. Pandemic-related stress or COVID-19 stress has also been linked to higher chances of anxiety, depression, and stressful life events. Filipino students have experienced anxiety, boredom, sadness, and isolation, which have adversely impacted their online learning experience during the pandemic. These statistics and more show us why it is very important that we as a society, as a community, make it easier to look out for one another. As Filipinos, let's demand better of our COVID-19 response for our kapwa, kababayan, for all our frontliners, and for everyone suffering from the pandemic. As advocates, be on the lookout for this year's National Mental Health Budget. Kasama niyo akong magbabantay sa kaban ng bayan. As friends, I encourage you to create avenues for you to reach out to the people you care about. A phone call, an online activity, a Zoom hangout, a game night, anything really, to keep in touch. This we have always known to be true. Our genuine relationships will always keep us going.